The bell of St. Bridget's tolled slow and heavy, its iron tongue echoing across the Dakota town of Rourke's Crossing, and folks streamed toward the churchyard as if summoned less to witness a marriage than to savor a spectacle. Ruth Callahan stood alone on the bottom step, her hands clutching the edge of a worn wedding veil, the lace frayed and yellowed with years of storage, her plain muslin dress patched by her own stitches, every mark of poverty laid bare beneath the bright, pitiless sun. A ripple of laughter swept through the crowd, cruel and sharp. "She looks more like a servant than a bride," one woman sneered. "No dowry, no land. She'll shame the Rourke name." A man spat into the dust. "The Rourkes breed horses finer than this girl." Ruth's cheeks burned as though scalded. Her lips trembled, but she made no reply. Silence had always been her shield, the only dignity she could hold when words would be torn apart by mockery. Beside her, Daniel Rourke stood rigid, tall shoulders stiff, his jaw clenched hard enough to ache. His brothers leaned from the crowd, boots polished, coats clean, their mouths twisted with contempt. "Break it off, Daniel," the eldest sneered. "Our house will not be bound to rags and shame." Judge Renner sat near the gate, robes heavy even in the heat, his stern face unmoved as he intoned, "The law cannot forbid your vows, Daniel, but the honor of your house is your duty. No man prospers who weds disgrace." A rumble of approval followed, swelling into jeers that rolled like thunder. Ruth's throat closed, tears pricking until they spilled unchecked down her cheeks, falling into the dust at her feet. She bent her head, whispering inwardly, "Lord, give me strength to endure just this day," and her fingers dug into the veil as though to keep her from crumbling. Then the jeers grew louder, sharper, until suddenly they faltered and died. From the pine line beyond the church came the steady beat of hooves, not hurried, not loud, but certain, each step carrying weight beyond its sound. All heads turned. Out from the trees stepped a stag unlike any eyes had seen. Its coat gleamed white as fresh snow. Its antlers rose tall and branching like a crown wrought of ivory, its eyes dark, steady, and knowing. The crowd fell back in shock, some crossing themselves, others gasping, whispers choking in their throats. The creature moved with slow, deliberate calm through the gate, the sun catching in its antlers until they blazed like silver fire. Ruth lifted her tear-streaked face, her breath stolen, her shame broken open, for the stag walked to her side as though summoned by her silence. It halted at the church steps, towering above her, and bent its great head low, bowing as though in reverence. The crowd hushed to stillness. Judge Renner's lips parted, but no words formed. The sneers of Daniel's kin died on their tongues. Daniel's hand reached toward Ruth, his eyes wide with awe, for it seemed to him the stag itself had blessed her. Ruth's tears came faster, but her shoulders straightened, her silence no longer shame but strength, for the white stag had chosen its place beside her, and in the churchyard of Rourke's Crossing, no one spoke again. The silence that held the churchyard after the stag bowed was thick enough to crush the air from every throat. Yet it did not last, for silence breeds fear, and fear breeds words, and soon the whispers broke like cracking ice. A woman clutched her shawl and gasped, "It's an omen, a sign from the old stories," while another hissed back, "An omen of ruin, can't you see? White beasts walk only when curses stir." Daniel's elder brother seized on it at once, his voice sharp with triumph. "Look at it! This is no blessing! It has come to warn us. A cursed girl draws cursed beasts." His words spread quickly, fanning the crowd's unease, and Judge Renner, finding his tongue again, rose heavily from his bench and declared, "The law speaks plain. When unnatural signs appear, we heed their warning. To bind this union is to invite disaster. The people shuddered, some nodding in fear, others clutching their children, but none daring to raise a cheer against the stag itself, which stood calm and unflinching, its white hide glowing in the sun, its dark eyes fixed not on the crowd, but on Ruth. She trembled, clutching her torn veil, her lips still sealed, though her heart thundered against her ribs. Daniel stepped closer, fury lighting his face, his hand hovering as if to take hers. "No curse stands here," he said, his voice hard. "I see a sign, yes, but not of ruin, a sign that she is chosen." His words startled the crowd into a murmur, some scoffing, some swayed, while Renner barked, "Chosen? By what law? By what scripture? This is blasphemy." Daniel's father, a stern man with iron-gray hair, stepped forward, his voice louder still. "You'll shame us all, boy. No son of mine weds a beggar marked by beasts. Break this off now, before the town turns its back on you." Ruth closed her eyes, her tears still hot, and in the hush that followed, the stag lowered its head again, the points of its antlers brushing the earth as if answering in solemn vow. A gasp rippled, and the old Lakota man who had lingered near the gate lifted his staff, his voice deep with weight. "Among my people, when the white stag bows, it bows for truth, not for lies, not for curses, truth." The words cracked open the stillness, half the crowd shivering, half muttering that such heathen talk had no place at a church door. But the image of the stag bowing could not be erased, and though Renner shouted again for order, his face mottled with anger. The silence that followed his cries was no longer obedience but doubt, heavy and waiting, as if the town itself was not sure whose word carried more weight, the judge's law or the stag's stillness. The murmurs thickened into arguments, the churchyard alive with clashing voices, some calling the stag a curse, others whispering of miracles, while the air itself seemed to hum with unease, and Daniel felt the weight of 100 eyes upon him as though the whole town balanced on his next breath. His eldest brother pushed forward, face twisted with scorn, and jabbed a finger toward Ruth. "This ends here. No Rourke will wed a pauper wrapped in rags, and no family of ours will bow to omens that bring shame. Cast her aside, Daniel, or you are no son of this house." The crowd gasped at the cruelty, yet some nodded, for wealth and name spoke loud in a place where survival hinged on both. Daniel's father stepped beside his elder son, his gray eyes cold as stone. "Break it, boy. Renounce her vows and walk back into this church as my heir, or walk with her into ruin and never again call yourself Rourke." The words struck like a hammer, but before Daniel could answer, Judge Renner raised his hand and thundered, "The law doesn't force a man to wed against reason. The beast's arrival is a sign of disorder. In my judgment, this union should be delayed, perhaps canceled entirely, until the matter is proven safe." His decree drew murmurs of approval, and for a moment Ruth swayed as if the world itself had turned against her. Her veil slipped from her fingers, drifting toward the dust, and laughter erupted from the women at the edge of the yard. "See, even heaven rejects her veil," one cackled. Ruth bent, tears spilling, but before she could snatch it up, the white stag stepped forward, its great hoof settling gently atop the lace. The laughter died, the crowd falling into stunned silence as the beast lowered its head once more, nudging the fabric back toward Ruth's trembling hands. She lifted it slowly, her tears shining, and the sight stilled every tongue, for though she said nothing, her silence spoke louder than any plea. Daniel's chest surged with pride and fury. "Enough," he growled, his voice cutting through the hush. "I will not renounce her, not for you, not for law, not for fear. I will stand with Ruth, and if the stag itself marks her, then let all here see she is chosen. Not cursed." Gasps rose, the crowd torn between awe and outrage, while Renner slammed his staff against the stones. "Blasphemy!" he roared, but the people's silence swallowed his cry, for the stag stood firm. Ruth clutched the veil close, and Daniel's defiance gleamed like steel drawn in the sun. The tension carried from the churchyard into the very walls of St. Bridget's, as Judge Renner, red-faced and quivering with rage, slammed his staff against the stone steps and ordered, "Bring them inside. No vows will be spoken on soil cursed by beasts. If there is to be a decision, it will be rendered beneath God's roof, where this madness cannot sway us." Daniel's brothers seized the chance, stepping forward with outstretched arms, their polished coats brushing Ruth as they tried to drag her up the steps, muttering venom, "Come, girl, you've had your show, now begone." Ruth stumbled, clutching her patched veil to her chest, her lips still sealed though her eyes brimmed with terror, and the crowd surged to see, some cheering the brothers' force, others crying out in protest. But as they pulled, a sound like thunder rolled across the yard, not from the sky but from the ground, as the White Stag stamped a hoof so hard the earth trembled beneath it. Gasps erupted, the brothers freezing mid-motion as the creature's great antlers swept toward them, glinting in the sun like blades of ivory. It did not charge, did not gore, only lowered its head with slow, deliberate menace, its dark gaze fixed on the men who would harm the bride. The elder brother's hand slipped from Ruth's arm, his bravado wilting in the hush, while women cried out, clutching their children, and even Renner staggered back a step, his lips pale. Daniel seized Ruth's hand and pulled her upright, his voice shaking but firm as he shouted, "You will not touch her again. No law, no kin, no fear will strip her of this moment. She is mine, and I am hers, and nothing. Not your gold, not your name, not your whip of authority, will change it." The churchyard erupted with cries, half in outrage, half in awe, and Renner raised his staff again, roaring, "Then hear this. If you wed her today, you wed without the blessing of church or law, and you cast your house into disgrace." His words struck like a curse, but before silence could settle, the stag turned slowly, climbed the first 2 steps of the church, and stood beside Ruth, its head high, its antlers brushing the doorway as if claiming it for her. A hush rippled outward, deep and thick, for no one could deny the sight, and even Renner's hand faltered as he lifted his staff, his eyes flickering with doubt he dared not speak. Ruth pressed the veil to her face, tears flowing free, yet still she uttered not a word, her silence glowing now like a flame that burned brighter in the presence of the stag's solemn guard, and Daniel squeezed her hand as if to say what she could not, that no decree of man would outweigh the sign they had been given. The sun had climbed higher, pouring its light across the churchyard, as though even heaven leaned close to witness the struggle, and the crowd pressed tighter, their whispers swelling into a tide that battered every word Daniel spoke, half of them calling him brave, the other half branding him a fool. Judge Renner, sweat streaking his crimson face, slammed his staff on the steps until splinters leapt, bellowing, "This farce ends now. A beast is no witness, a beast is no priest, and a beast is no blessing. To marry her under its shadow is to spit on the law of God and man alike." His decree rattled the square, and Daniel's father stepped forward, his voice sharp as a lash. "Then let her shame be shown, and you will see, Judge, that heaven marks her unfit." With a swift motion he seized the edge of Ruth's veil, yanking hard enough that the fragile lace tore in his hands. Gasps tore from the onlookers as the veil fluttered down in ribbons, exposing Ruth's tear-streaked face, her cheeks blazing with humiliation. Women snickered cruelly, men muttered approval, and one voice cried out, "There, even the veil rejects her." Ruth staggered, clutching the tatters as if to hide her shame. But her silence held, her lips refusing to beg. Daniel roared, shoving his father back. "Enough! You will not touch her again." But before another word could rise, the white stag moved. With a sound like thunder muffled in its chest, it stepped forward onto the top step. Towering above them all, its antlers flaring wide and bright in the noon sun, the torn veil brushed against its hooves, and with deliberate care the stag lowered its head, catching the largest piece on its antlers and lifting it high. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the lace fluttered like a banner of defiance, glowing white in the light, no longer rags but a symbol of something holy. Ruth pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling fresh, and Daniel fell to one knee, overwhelmed by awe. The old Lakota elder lifted his staff high and shouted, "See, the stag carries what men despise. It lifts what you tear down. Truth doesn't bow to cruelty." The crowd broke apart in confusion, some shouting that it was sorcery, others dropping to their knees in reverence. Judge Renner's voice cracked as he roared, "Blasphemy! Trickery!" But his words rang hollow against the hush that followed. Ruth bent to gather the smaller ribbons of her veil, pressing them against her chest, her silence unbroken, her dignity untouchable, for the white stag had taken what was torn from her and lifted it beyond shame. Daniel rose, his voice hoarse but steady. "You cannot call her cursed while heaven itself crowns her. You may spit your law, but I will keep my vow." And for the first time, the crowd did not jeer or cheer, but stood in breathless stillness, staring at the stag that waited upon the church steps, its antlers alight with lace, as if heaven itself had chosen to place a crown upon the silent bride. Night fell over Rourke's crossing like a heavy cloak, the last glow of the sun bleeding from the horizon as lanterns flickered alive across the square, their wavering light no match for the memory of the day's turmoil. The people had not dispersed. They lingered in hushed knots, unable to tear themselves from the sight of the white stag still standing in the churchyard, tall and unmoving, its antlers glimmering pale beneath the rising moon. Inside the church, Ruth knelt alone at the altar, her torn veil folded carefully in her lap, her hands clasped in silent prayer, lips trembling with words she dared not speak aloud. Daniel sat a few pews back, his head bowed, torn between fury at his kin and awe at the miracle outside, his heart hammering with the weight of vows half spoken, half denied. Judge Renner had retreated only as far as the rectory, pacing furiously, muttering that dawn would see this madness ended, that no beast could sway the judgment of law. The Rourke family clustered nearby, whispering plans to drag Daniel away before vows could be sealed, their pride bruised and burning. Yet none dared set foot beyond the church doors, for through the tall windows they could see it, the stag waiting, its breath rising in clouds, its hooves rooted as though it had grown from the earth itself. An old woman whispered to her daughter, "It has not moved since the bell tolled noon. If it were of flesh, it would hunger or falter. This is no animal but a sign." The girl clutched her mother's hand tighter, eyes wide with wonder. Across the pew, a man scoffed, "It's trickery, some hunter's prize painted white to sway simple minds." But even as he spoke, his voice shook, for the stag turned its great head and fixed him with a gaze so deep he faltered into silence. Ruth's tears glistened in the candlelight as she laid the tatters of her veil on the altar, whispering inwardly, "Lord, I have no dowry but silence, no treasure but faith. If this sign is yours, let it shield us." And outside, as if in answer, the stag bent its head once more, antlers brushing the church door, the gesture so solemn that those watching fell quiet, their disputes swallowed in awe. Hours passed. The night deepened, and still it did not leave. Mothers rocked their children to sleep on their shoulders, men rubbed weary eyes, yet none left the square. for to turn away was to miss what might yet unfold. By midnight, a frost laced the grass, silver under the moon, but the stag did not shiver. It stood like a sentinel carved of snow and breath, its presence so unyielding that even the fiercest doubters dared not mock again. Inside, Daniel rose and approached Ruth, laying his hand gently on hers. "We will not face dawn alone," he whispered, his voice breaking but sure. She looked up at him through tears, lips parting though no sound came, and outside the stag lifted its head, releasing a long, low breath that steamed in the cold, like the sigh of heaven itself keeping watch through the night. Morning broke cold and bright, the first beams of sun striking the steeple and gilding the frost that clung to the churchyard grass, and with it came the restless stir of a crowd that had kept vigil through the night. Mothers with weary eyes, men stiff from leaning on fence rails, children blinking sleep from their lashes, all rose to see if the white stag had vanished with the darkness. Yet there it stood still, proud and immovable, its coat shining with the glow of morning, its breath steaming in the crisp air, its antlers spread wide as though crowned by the sun itself. Murmurs spread like fire. "It waited all night," someone whispered in awe. "Not once did it falter." Another muttered in fear, "No beast of flesh stands so long. This is witchcraft." Judge Renner, gaunt from his sleepless rage, thrust himself to the front of the church steps and slammed his staff against the stones, his voice hoarse but furious. "Hear me. A night of silence does not change the truth. This is no miracle but a test of our resolve. If we yield to beasts, we yield to ruin. The vows will not be spoken, and the disgrace will end today." The words carried like a lash, drawing cheers from those who feared, but groans from those who had seen enough to doubt. Daniel emerged from the church beside Ruth, her torn veil pinned clumsily to her hair with trembling fingers, her silence unbroken, yet her eyes fierce with resolve. Daniel's voice rang out, stronger than ever. "Judge, you call this a curse, but I call it a witness. If this stag is no sign of heaven, then why has it chosen her? Why does it stand still when jeers are hurled but lower its head when her tears fall?" The crowd roared with murmurs, and Daniel's father stormed forward, his face red as flame. "Enough, boy. You shame us all. Break these vows or break from this family forever." His brothers shouted in chorus, "Choose, Daniel, your blood or your beggar." Ruth flinched, her fingers gripping the veil until the lace tore anew, but she did not speak. Daniel stepped before her, his hand raised like a shield. "If she is a beggar, then I will beg with her. If she is cursed, then curse me too. But I will not leave her side. Not for name, nor gold, nor law." His words struck the crowd like a bell, some crying out in admiration, others spitting in disgust. Renner lifted his staff again, his voice thundering. "Then you defy the authority of this town, and I will see you both cast out before noon." But before he could speak further, the white stag turned, its hooves striking the stones as it climbed the church steps, higher than it had gone before, its massive frame looming between the judge and the silent bride. It bowed once more, antlers sweeping low across the threshold, and the hush that fell was so complete that even the crows on the steeple ceased their cries. For the second time in 2 days, no one dared to speak. And even the judge's words faltered into silence, swallowed by the awe that clung to the air like incense. The hush that gripped the churchyard broke like glass beneath the bootsteps of Daniel's brothers, who surged forward in fury, their pride too wounded to bow before silence. "If law will not act, then blood will," the eldest shouted, seizing Ruth by the arm with a grip so cruel her skin whitened beneath his fingers. Gasps tore from the onlookers, mothers pulling children back as the brothers tried to drag her down the steps, the tatters of her veil fluttering like torn banners in the morning light. Judge Renner, seizing the moment, raised his staff high and roared, "Take her away, and let the vows be broken by force. Heaven will not curse us for removing blasphemy." The words roused some to cheer, others to cry out in protest. The churchyard boiling with voices, yet over it all rose Daniel's shout, raw with fury. "Unhand her! You'll not touch her while I breathe!" He hurled himself forward, wrenching Ruth free, but was driven back by his father's hand, iron-hard and unrelenting. "You shame us beyond repair," the old man bellowed. "Better a son dead than wed to disgrace." Ruth stumbled, tears streaming, her lips still sealed, though every sob shook her frame, and she clutched the veil as if it were her very life. Then the white stag moved. With a suddenness that stole the breath from every throat, it bounded up the steps, its hooves striking like thunder, its massive frame looming over the men. It lowered its antlers, sweeping them in a great arc that forced Daniel's brothers to stumble back, their polished boots slipping on the stone. The eldest cried out as the sharp ivory caught the hem of his coat and tore it clean, sending fabric fluttering into the crowd. Screams erupted, some of terror, some of awe, as the stag stamped the stones so hard that dust rose in a choking cloud. The younger children wailed, women cried prayers, and even hardened men staggered back, for never had they seen such power wielded without a drop of blood spilled. The stag did not gore, did not kill. It drove them back with warning, not slaughter, its eyes dark and blazing as if lit from within. Daniel seized Ruth's hand and pulled her against his chest, shielding her with his body, his voice shaking with wonder. "It defends her," he whispered. "Before God and all men, it defends her." Judge Renner tried to shout again, but the words cracked in his throat, thin and brittle, and for the first time his staff trembled in his grip. The old Lakota elder raised his own staff high and cried out, his voice like a storm breaking. "You see it now. It lowers its crown for truth and lowers its wrath for lies. No man may strike what heaven guards." The stag lifted its antlers skyward, the torn veil piece still tangled upon one tine, fluttering like a flag of defiance against the morning sun, and the people, shamed and stunned, fell once more into silence. For they knew they had reached a place where law and wealth no longer commanded, only awe. The churchyard quaked beneath the weight of silence, yet Judge Renner, pride stung and power slipping from his grasp, could not let awe replace authority. His face purpled, sweat streaming down his temple as he lifted his staff high, the polished wood trembling in his grasp. "This farce ends here," he thundered, though his voice cracked under the strain. "I am the law in Rourke's crossing. If no man has the courage to end this disgrace, then I alone will strike it down." The crowd gasped as he lurched forward, staff raised like a club above Ruth's bowed head. Mothers screamed, children cried, and Daniel flung himself in front of her, arms spread, his voice raw. "You'll strike me first, Judge, if you strike at her." Ruth clutched her torn veil against her breast, tears streaking her cheeks, her silence holding like steel though terror shook her frame. For a heartbeat, the square teetered on the edge of chaos. Then the white stag surged. With a bound swift as lightning, it planted itself between judge and bride, its hooves hammering the stones, its antlers rising higher than any crown. With a single motion, it swept Renner's staff aside, the blow so fierce the wood snapped in two and clattered useless to the ground. Gasps ripped through the people like wind through dry grass, some falling to their knees, others crossing themselves, all struck dumb by the sight. Renner stumbled back, his eyes wide, his lips moving soundlessly. The color draining from his face as though the life had been ripped from him. The stag towered above him, its eyes fixed deep into his soul, and for a breathless moment it seemed the creature might lower its antlers and drive him into the earth. Yet it did not. Instead, it loosed a bellow so deep and resonant it shook the steeple, a sound that carried power no man could match, and every voice in the square fell silent once more. Daniel gripped Ruth's hand and pulled her upright, his voice clear and strong. "The law of men falls, Judge. The law of heaven stands. You can tear her veil, you can cast your curses, but you cannot deny what stands before us." The old Lakota elder raised his staff high, shouting, "The stag has spoken. The bride is chosen. The vow is sanctified." And the crowd, as if one soul, erupted, some weeping, some cheering, others stunned into reverent hush, but none dared oppose what they had seen. Ruth pressed the veil tighter to her chest, her silence radiant, her tears now shining not with shame, but with triumph, as the stag lowered its great head beside her and Daniel, standing guard as if heaven itself had crowned the silent bride. The bell of St. Brigid's tolled again, this time not in warning or command, but in solemn rhythm, each peal carrying across the town like a hymn of surrender, and the people, still hushed from the stag's thunderous bellow, parted as Daniel led Ruth up the final steps. She clutched the tatters of her torn veil, her silence radiant, her tears shining not with shame, but with a strange new dignity, for beside her the white stag stood tall and still, its antlers lifting high into the morning light, one tine still crowned with a shred of lace fluttering like a banner of triumph. Judge Renner had fallen to his knees in the dust, his broken staff at his side, his lips moving in stammered denial, though no one listened, for his authority had shattered as surely as the wood in his hand. Daniel turned to the gathering and cried, his voice steady, "This union is not for law, nor for wealth, nor for name. It is for vow, for faith, for the truth heaven itself has chosen to bless." The words rolled through the crowd, and no voice rose against him, for even the harshest doubters could not deny the sight before their eyes. An old priest, trembling but resolute, stepped from the doorway of the church, his hands lifted. "If heaven gives a sign, who am I to silence it?" he said softly, then raised his voice. "By the witness of all present, by the vows spoken from the heart, let these two be joined." A cheer broke, ragged but true, swelling as mothers wept and men shouted, while Daniel bent and pressed his forehead to Ruth's, whispering the vows that did not need to be heard to be believed. She gave no words in reply, but her tears and her silence spoke louder than speech. At that moment the stag turned, its hooves striking slow upon the stones, and descended the steps, moving through the parted crowd with a majesty no man could match. Children reached out trembling hands, but none dared touch, for the awe was too great. At the gate of the churchyard it paused, lifted its head to the sky, and released a low breath that steamed in the morning air like incense rising to heaven, then walked back toward the pines until its white form faded into the light of the new day. The bell tolled once more, not in judgment but in blessing, and Ruth clutched the veil to her chest, its torn edges now sacred, its shame transformed into a crown she alone could bear. Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders, guiding her through the church doors as the people bowed their heads. And for the first time in the history of Rourke's crossing, silence was not born of fear, but of reverence. And so it was that on the day the White Stag stood in the churchyard, no one spoke again. Not because they were silenced, but because the truth had already spoken, and its voice would echo for generations. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Echoes of the West. If you had stood in that churchyard when the White Stag bowed its head, would you have called it a curse, or dared to believe it was a blessing?